Good morning and welcome to the Point. This week we continue a look at some of those important state house races that you'll be deciding in November. With the primary and now the state conventions behind us, we're into the final weeks of the general election campaign. This week, the 76th district, where incumbent Democrat Winnie Brinks faces both a Republican and a U.S. Taxpayer Party challenge. First, incumbent Democrat Winnie Brinks. Let's start with the basics. You decided to run again after one of the more interesting contests of 2 years ago. Now you're running as the incumbent. What motivates you to run again?
Sure, Rick. There's a lot that I still need to do. There's a lot of work that the voters have asked me to work on, and I would like to continue to do that, of course. And it's a great honor to serve as the representative for Grand Rapids, and it's a real reward to be able to help constituents when they call your office. And I also have a few policy issues I'd like to continue working on. We've seen some improvements in some things that I'm proud of, like school funding has gone up in the last year. It's not enough. I'd like to continue to support schools. I'd like to continue to work on some other bills as well that I've introduced. So I've got a lot more to do, and the voters are supporting me in that. So that's why I decided to run again.
When you first came on the political scene, I remember meeting you for the first time over at Calder Plaza. And I asked you why you were running, and you talked about education, and certainly your background. You talked about some of the things you wanted to do. How is it different from what you thought it might be when this started a little over 2 years ago?
There's a lot more partisan rancor than I had anticipated, and you always hear that there is that lack of cooperation, but it really is true, and I think that's something that I've really personally tried to work on improving. And I know there are a lot of other moderate Dems who came in when I came in who would really like to see us work together across the aisle a little better on issues that we have in common. And I think we can find some common ground in education. I know there are a few members of the Republican caucus who would be willing to work on us on that topic in particular with us, but it's been really difficult in the environment there. So that's been somewhat of an issue for me, but I think that's something that I can really make a contribution on as well.
When you talk about that, and I always try to, I don't like to focus on that because there are things that get done.
Yeah.
And there is cooperation. I know you have relationships with Republicans. I know Republicans who have relationships with Democrats. It's not like that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But what does happen is when it gets down to the big stuff, there's some real partisan lines. There are things where Democrats are here and Republicans are there, and there is no apparent way to build that bridge across. But what is it like if you have, for example, some of the policy issues that you were talking about that you would like to work on? What is it like if you have something that you want to work on? Is that something that you can go to Republican leadership and say, I have this issue, or is that something that you have to partner with other Republicans to do before you can get it to that point?
I would say generally the latter. I would partner, and that's been my personal approach. Maybe there are others who do it a different way, but to partner with other individual Republicans who I know have share my concerns about something. For example, the breast density notification bill that I've been working on. It would help detect breast cancer earlier in certain women, and I introduced a bill like that. Senator Hildenbrand introduced a very similar bill in the Senate, and that has moved forward through the Senate, been passed there, and we're now working together on that in the House. So that's one of the things that I'm really hoping we'll be able to address in September, or possibly lame duck.
You were talking earlier, before we started this, about just getting to know your district. What has that been like? Because for more than 2 decades you've lived in this general area, but you were talking about, I'm sure there was a little learning curve in Lansing, but there was a lot to learn about your district that maybe you didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. The district lines changed, of course, so even folks who knew the district and the city really well before didn't get the feel for this district as it is newly drawn until the last 2 years. And so as I've gone around knocking on doors, knocked thousands of doors, even in the off-election year as a legislator, just talking with voters and saying, what is it that you're concerned about? How can I help you? And there's really no experience quite like that in terms of being able to really know what your constituents want and think, and get feedback from them without as we mentioned earlier, without that filter of either the media or a lobbyist or some sort of interest group. So that experience has been invaluable, and I really, really enjoy talking with the people I represent.
The good news for you is in the next 60 some odd days between now and Election Day, you'll get a chance to do a lot more of that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you will be doing while you're doing that is driving around road construction, something else we were just talking about. But one of the things that did not get done before the legislature broke for the summer was coming up with a total package of road funding, at least as described by the governor. So let me ask you about that. First of all, do you subscribe to the governor's number of 1.2, 1.5 billion a year for the next 10 years? I know over in the House there was a bill that got you part of the way there, but it didn't move in the Senate. And if you, first of all, agree with that number, do you have a way of getting there?
So I would say this is one of those examples where the leadership in the House got together with both sides of the aisle, and they did work out a pretty big solution that was an excellent start to solving the problem of how to fund the road issue. We had a bipartisan package. It was an excellent start. It wasn't enough money probably to meet the need. And so the governor's number, I think, is accurate in terms of a good start. We've got folks out there who know a lot more than I do about what it costs to really fix the infrastructure who are saying that we need more than that. I'd be willing to look at that if we can make that work, but at a minimum we need to start looking at finding a way to work this out that's fair to everybody and that uses existing resources really well. So I think there's a lot of potential there. I was very disappointed in the Senate at the end of our term at the beginning of summer that they couldn't come up with something to send back to the House. We sent them something that we worked really hard on. I think we made a good effort. Would like to have seen them toss that back to us more complete. It didn't happen. I think that's something that needs to happen, and I doubt that it will happen in September before the election, but I think that there's hope for that in lame duck. So I would like to see the leadership take that up again.
If the House version as passed was adopted as part of that plan, that still leaves you 50% short,
right.
Probably a little more than 50% short. Does this happen without more revenues?
I'm not sure. What I would like to see is a comprehensive solution proposed by the leadership of both parties that can get support from most of the legislature, and I would like to see what that looks like. And I would be happy to entertain various ways to make that work. I think there's a lot of members of our caucus who say, bring us something and then we'll decide. And my criteria is really, does it make best use of the existing resources? Is it fair to all of the people who have an interest in seeing our roads improved? We as citizens are paying more with our maintenance and not getting any improved roads when we just pay for that with our vehicles. If we can put that kind of money into our roads and actually see them getting fixed, I know a lot of citizens would be a lot happier with that. How exactly we pay for it is a good question, but that's something that really does need to be worked out as a whole comprehensive solution among the leaders in both caucuses, and they need to bring it to all of us as legislators and say, we think this will work.
Brinks will face Republican Donnie Jo DeYoung in the general election. We talked to her about her motivation for running. Well, the last time we talked, we were talking about the primary race where you were successful. Now about 10 weeks, a little less than that by the time this airs, till the general election. Let's go back to that original question about why you're running and what you hope to get done if you're successful in November.
Well, I'm running, I think, I have the experience, the expertise, the background. I have expertise in public finance, public budgeting. I'm faculty at Grand Valley. I'm the former city controller for Grand Rapids. And I think I have an ability to get the job done, get it done efficiently and effectively, and put politics aside and move our city and our state forward.
You just said one of the phrases that so many people running for office and so many freshmen over in Lansing talk about, putting politics aside. Over the course of a number of years of people who moved through this cycle because of term limits, many people have gone with that idea. But there are still a lot of politics left in Lansing. How do you do that? How do you put politics aside? Understanding that at city government level, the supposed nonpartisan candidates do tend to seem to work together.
Right. And I think you still can do it at the state level. I think just my ability to work with other people to reach across the aisle has shown at the city, at Grand Valley. I'm a conservative in a university setting. I've been chair of the faculty salary budget committee, and when I have an agenda, I can move through those things very effectively and efficiently. So, and when I say politics aside, kind of the curmudgeon, we have these differences, let's set our differences aside and let's come to an agreement on how to get things done. Roads, education, bring the economy back, and I think they're doing a good job. And I think but for no other reason, I'm the fiscal conservative in this race, and I think I share the values of the Grand Rapidians, and that's what I'm going to take with me to Lansing.
Well, let's talk about that roads thing, because that's still not done, and my bet is it won't be done by Election Day. I mean, I guess there is some hope, but and again, this is some of the same ground that we covered, but it remains one of the biggest issues that I hear about. What many candidates are telling me that they're hearing at the doors when they're going to introduce themselves is that the governor has called for what essentially I think is about $1.5 billion. The number started at 1.2, and now people are saying because it hasn't happened, it needs to be more. Whether or not you agree with that number, right, most everybody agrees there needs to be a bigger investment into infrastructure in the state. How do you go about that, being a fiscal conservative, who I assume with that title is not wild about raising taxes?
Right. It's not about raising taxes. I think it's about reassessing how we use our tax dollars. So I like to look at both sides of the equation, revenue and expenditures. I always believe you can squeeze that turnip just a little bit more to find that savings. We do that at home, and I would expect that the legislature would do that as well. When it comes to the revenue side, I want to make sure that the tax policy is fair. And right now, the way that the tax is structured, we have our sales tax, which a portion of that now is going to roads, and then we have our gas tax, which all of it is supposed to go to the roads. So I would rather see all the money that we're spending, you and me, when we go to the pump, that all of that money goes to the roads. I'm a proponent of the benefits received principle. If you use a service that is provided, you're going to pay for it. We do that with water. We should do that with roads. So all of the money that we pay in taxes for the roads should go to the roads. So it's really just a realignment of the tax structure. We're not raising taxes, I don't think, but I think you should put all the money that we're taxed into the roads, which would give us a windfall.
When you talked about those issues, the first two that you enumerated, you talked about roads, infrastructure. You also talked about education. Education remains a flashpoint in Lansing because there are big differences in the approach and big differences about how much money should be spent.
Sure.
Some people say, well, first we need to figure out how much it costs. Others suggest that we need to make sure that there's more money in because they believe that schools are not properly funded. Is education and improving education, which I suspect is a goal of most people in Michigan, is that a matter of money, or is it a matter of curriculum, or is it both?
I think it's both. Again, looking at the expenditure side and the revenue side. Funding is a part of it. If we can increase the funding all we want, but we still have schools that, some of them are our highest funded schools, and they have some of the lowest performing metrics. So funding is not the issue there, something else is. So there's a number of things, a number of variables that go into the expenditure side, and we have to identify those costs. Why is it high cost? So one thing that I'm learning more about is early on, the early childhood development and curriculum there, but also identifying learning disabilities. And 20% of our population is dyslexic. So whether it's mild form or severe form, and we're not catching those at a young age. And if you don't catch it early on and by third grade, it might not be caught by the time they graduate, and it could impact that student quite significantly. So let's look at ways to solve some of those problems. So why do we have those metrics that are poor performing? Could that be one of the issues? If so, well, let's fix that. There's one state, I think, in the country that says mandatory testing for dyslexia. Not that I'm pushing mandatory testing, but it is at least an idea that is out there. There's a movement to get people tested for that. So that could be one reason why we have low performing schools. That's not the reason, but it could be a reason. Then we have some schools that are low funded, but perform well. So let's figure out what the issue is and solve that problem rather than focusing just on funding, because there are other variables that we have to focus on.
We just have a few minutes left. I spent most of this past weekend at state conventions, first for Republicans and then for Democrats. They were all talking about the same thing, but came at it at diametrically opposed views, and that is what has gone on in the last 4 years. If you listen to the Republicans, progress has been made, the budgets are being balanced, etc. If you listen to the Democrats, that the most vulnerable people had been impacted, hurt, cut, or taxed because of this administration. Where is the state of Michigan as you view it, as someone who is a would-be legislator who will have to deal with both of those arguments?
I think we're coming back. I think the Republicans are right. We are the comeback state. We've created jobs. We still need to create more jobs. When you increase that base, that tax base, the middle class, that's who I'm concerned about. Those are our fellow Grand Rapidians. Some of them still don't have jobs. So how can we make sure that we're bringing good, well-paying jobs to Grand Rapids? We still have work to do. So I kudos to the Republicans for balancing the budget, moving the economy forward, but we still have more to do, and I think I can be part of that.
The 76th House District will not feature just a Republican and a Democrat, but a member of the U.S. Taxpayer Party, and you will meet him when we return to The Point. Welcome back to The Point. The 76th House District is currently represented by Democrat Winnie Brinks. Republican Donnie Joe DeYoung is also running for that position, as is William Moore. He is a member of the U.S. Taxpayer Party, and he talked to us about why he wants to run and what his party stands for. Tell me what motivates you to run for this House race this time around, because as you well know, there was some big primaries out there. A lot of folks tried for a lot of these different House seats, but now we're in the final 10 or so weeks. So what makes you want to run for this?
Well, Rick, if I saw a candidate that was a good candidate for the race, I would vote for them. I don't believe we have a qualified candidate yet. I am compelled to run for my children, for my grandchildren. I see our society crumbling, and we need some assistance in Lansing, and that's what makes me run.
If I say Democrat or Republican, people believe they know what those parties stand for. There could be a lot of debate about that. But if I say U.S. taxpayer, people may not know. Give me the basics about the Taxpayer Party.
The U.S. Taxpayers Party believes, as our fathers did, in constitutional adherence. They believe in small government. They believe in a moral fabric within society. The U.S. Taxpayers Party stands on solid moral ground, and they believe, as our forefathers believed. That's it in a nutshell.
When you talk about the Taxpayer Party, it's been around a good long while, and people have been promoting those ideas. There are a number of what we refer to as third parties out there who have different views and beliefs. What do you have to do you think, to get those beliefs or those parties that you participate in with the beliefs that they have, this party that you participate in, more broadly accepted? Because the dominant parties remain the Republicans and Democrats.
Well, the beliefs are already broadly accepted. What we need is more exposure. The media, for some reason, is not covering the third parties, or the minor parties, technically, as they're called. We need some more media exposure. We need people to understand that we're out there, that we're a viable party, we're a ballot qualified party. We're on the ballot every election. People just need to see us. They need to understand who we are. And they need to understand that as long as we continue to vote for the Republicans and Democrats, the major parties, we're going to continue to have the same results. People have been voting Republican and Democrat now for decades, and I have to ask the question, are things getting better? Whether we have Republicans in office or Democrats in office, things are not getting better. They're continually worsening, and the people are becoming more and more unhappy. Government, we can't say, has gotten better or improved. So people just need to take a look at us and understand that we have the correct answers.
Talk to me about what you would like to achieve. If you were successful in winning this House seat in November and in January you were sworn in, what is it that you would want to do in Lansing?
There are three things that need to be done in Lansing. One is we need to improve our education system. And by that, I don't mean throw more money at it. Two, the family in Michigan needs to be strengthened. And number three is we need constitutional adherence, not only in state government, but we need to pressure the federal government to adhere to their constitution.
What is it, if you have an example, that you don't think is being done constitutionally in Michigan? Do you think that they're violating the Constitution?
In the area of education, absolutely. The Constitution of the state of Michigan says religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. And the state of Michigan, although we have improved our charter schools and increased the number of our charter schools, we've allowed homeschools, our public education is not adhering to the religion and morality part, and there's some question about the knowledge part of the constitutional mandate. We've got to get morality back into our schools. We've got to begin teaching religion back in our schools. We're failing our children, and we see the effects all over.
When you say don't throw more money, then you're talking about revamping not only curriculum, but you're talking about revamping the way that the state approaches education from perhaps the standpoint, are you suggesting more diversity in charter schools and that type of thing? Or are you talking about the existing structure but reintroducing a curriculum?
Well, both. Yeah. We need to encourage other means of education. Again, the charter schools, we need to continue the expansion of the charter school program. We need to change the curriculum in our public schools. Again, just being redundant, saying we need to introduce morality and religion back into our curriculum. But we need to encourage ideas, which I don't think we're doing now. We've got homeschool, charter school, parochial school, and public school. Well, let's talk about how we can improve what we have, but not only that, let's go beyond. I wouldn't have a problem if we wanted to open the debate as to businesses starting school. Our children need a good, solid education. They're not getting it now.
Got just a couple of minutes left. I want to ask you, this is kind of a big shift of gear, so I apologize for that. But one question I've talked to almost every candidate about is the question that many people say that they hear the most when they're knocking on doors. And that is, when are you going to do something about the roads? The infrastructure in this state is clearly in decline. Now, you can argue about why that is so, but the governor at least has said he thinks it's because there's not enough money and he wants up to $1 billion or $1.5 billion a year for the next 10 years. What would be your take on an idea to raise that kind of money to fix roads?
Well, we've already taken one big step, and that's with the recent Proposal 1, the distribution of money to the cities and local governments. We'll see how much impact that has. Hopefully it'll have some positive impact. But beyond that, I think we need to watch where we're spending it. For instance, it was 4 years ago the DOT spent $8 million to put the rumple strips down the center of all our state highways. And was it really necessary to spend that money during the height of our recession? I don't think so. Let's take a look at how we're spending that money.
The 76th House District is one of 2 Grand Rapids area House seats, and if you're not sure about where to vote, you can always go to woodtv.com, look for the link, and find out exactly where you'll be voting, who is in your district, and get a sample ballot. We'll be back with more To the Point in just a moment. So now the general election is less than 10 weeks away. Between now and then, you'll have to make your decisions about who you'll vote for governor and for U.S. Senate, for the State House and the State Senate and the U.S. House. We'll be featuring as many of those races as we can between now and then. That's why we hope you will join us every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock right here on Wood TV 8 as we talk about the important facets of Decision 2014. Then follow us for the very latest coverage throughout the week and the most comprehensive coverage on election night. We'll see you next week. To the Point.